Welcome. My name is Sarah Joseph. Thank you for joining me today for my webinar, Send Your Storytime to Kindergarten, How to Incorporate School Readiness Skills into Your Preschool Programming. I developed this webinar because early literacy has always been a passion of mine. I've served as an early literacy specialist in a public library for almost 5 years, and in my previous career, I was a preschool teacher helping children and parents prepare for the transition to kindergarten. I hope through this webinar you can gain some new ideas to using your story times. Let's get started. School readiness is defined as a combination of different skills leading to success in school. Today we're going to talk about school readiness and its relationship to early literacy programming. Specifically, I want to talk about how we can add these skills into our existing storytime structure and how it can demonstrate the value of early literacy programming in your library. If you currently work in a public library system, you might be using the Every Child Ready to Read program. This is a parent education initiative that was jointly developed by the Association for Library Service to Children and the Public Library Association. The goal of the program is to provide parents and caregivers with tips on how to incorporate the practices of singing, talking, reading, playing, and writing into everyday life. Studies have shown that these 5 practices provide a great foundation for early literacy skills and can increase a child's ability to learn how to read. A big question that early literacy librarians face today is, does storytime make a difference? The iSchool of the University of Washington in 2009 created the first study to assess the impact of early literacy storytime in public libraries. Their project, entitled Views 2, was a 4-year study that discovered that children are in fact absorbing the information they're learning during storytime. The study also discovered that when librarians were intentional about their incorporation of early literacy content, it made an impact on the children's early literacy behaviors. As the authors of this study state, by demonstrating the ability of library staff to positively influence children's learning behaviors, libraries may be seen as equal partners in the education of children and as legitimate early learning professionals. Given this information, it seems prudent that librarians can use regular programming to add in necessary school readiness skills to help as an educational tool for parents and caregivers. So what do I mean when I say school readiness? While many states have their own qualifications for entry to kindergarten, a lot follow the 5 fundamental domains for school readiness set forth by the U.S. Department of Education. They are approaches to learning, which is a child's interest in learning new skills, their ability to stay on task, and their ability to apply knowledge previously learned. Cognition and general knowledge. This refers to a child's ability to participate in mathematical reasoning, imaginative thinking, and problem solving. Physical well-being and motor development. This area covers the overall health and well-being of a child and also refers to a child's fine and gross motor skills. Social emotional development. This refers to a child's ability to interact with others, listen attentively, and follow directions. It also refers to a child's ability to recognize and appropriately handle their own emotions and feelings in the social context of a learning environment. And lastly, language development. This refers to skills associated with vocabulary, letter recognition, sound recognition, pre-reading skills, and reading comprehension. These 5 domains of school readiness can easily be added to your preschool programming. You might even be doing some of them already. Today we are going to be discussing library services for preschoolers. It's important to highlight this age group because fewer than half of children in this age range are enrolled in preschool programs in the United States. This is where Storytime can help by providing educational support to these families. Remember, Storytime is an informal learning environment and should remain fun. Storytime should make children excited about the learning process without turning storytime into too much work. The principles that we're discussing today help prepare children for school and can create a strong foundation for success later in their educational career. If your library already participates in Every Child Ready to Read, it's easy to fit school readiness skills into these guidelines. First, I want to talk about some brief recommendations for Storytime format incorporating school readiness skills. I recommend following a similar format each week that includes a theme and letter to discuss. This will help establish a consistent routine that caregivers and children can expect. Have a welcome statement. This is a brief statement that addresses the room with your name and theme. This is a great time to engage the adults in the room and review some of the readiness skills that you're going to be incorporating. Add unstructured playtime to the end of storytime. Provide crafts and activities that adults and children can do together when storytime is over. And add stations that can be revealed at the end of storytime. These stations can provide easy activities that prompt school readiness, intrigue parents, and are fun for the kids. Over the next few slides, we're going to be discussing Every Child Ready to Read's 5 practices and how they can be utilized to build school readiness skills. Let's begin with how talking encourages the school readiness skills of social, emotional, and language development. Let's discuss an activity that facilitates talking and supports social emotional development. We all have emotions, and young children are just learning how to regulate them. Here's where we can provide support to their recognition and understanding through a storytime activity. Add a weekly check-in at the beginning of storytime. Pull out a chart that has different emotions on it, like this one, and ask them, how are you feeling today? You can even share how you're feeling. Adding this to your weekly storytime provides support for both children and adults. It models how to recognize our emotions and validate our feelings, something indicative of school readiness. Talking also encourages the school readiness domain of language development by increasing a child's phonological awareness, letter knowledge, print awareness, print motivation, increased vocabulary, and narrative skills. Here are some examples of how to incorporate these language development skills into your story time. You can discuss the letter of the week. For example, this week we are going to be learning about the letter C for colors. What does the letter C sound like? K, k. What other words begin with the letter C? You can also have a conversation about the theme of the week. For example, today we're going to learn about colors. What's your favorite color? We can also encourage conversation while reading the book. For example, today we're going to read a book about colors entitled Mouse Paint by Ellen Stoll Walsh. What do you think is going to happen in this story based on the title? All these conversations will help children expand upon their language development and preparedness for school. Singing has to be my favorite part about storytime, and I would argue it's probably my storytime kids' favorite too. Research shows that singing and music stimulates brain development by activating new pathways in a child's brain. Singing can help introduce new words and concepts and help with the child's memorization skills. By adding finger or body movements to a song, it supports motor skills. Singing can be a whole body experience that gets children motivated and works to support various school readiness skills. Here are some singing activities that help support school readiness. One of my favorite songs to have at the end of storytime is The More We Get Together. Every week when I introduce this song, I teach the American Sign Language words for more, together, friends, and happy. We go over these hand movements several times to make sure everyone gets it. Then we sing it as a group 3 times. The repetition of this song and the added sign language help to encourage language development and fine motor skills. Another favorite is Old MacDonald Had a Farm. I like to bring out a large basket with stuffed animals. I have the group guess what animal they think I might pull from the basket. I like to give them clues like, this animal is big and it gives us milk. What do you think it is? By asking them questions and talking through the song, you can encourage language development and improve on their approaches to learning. A couple of other action songs to include could be Head, Shoulders, Knees, and Toes, or The Wheels on the Bus, interactive songs that get children and adults to stand up, move around, and be silly. I also want to talk about counting songs, which teach early math skills. Some example songs could be 5 Green and Speckled Frogs or 5 Little Ducks. These songs can be done on a flannel board or as a group activity with movements. All of these songs help to build school readiness. Book The Littlest Learners, Preparing Your Child for Kindergarten. Roginski states, young children who spend time in free play use more sophisticated language, solve more problems, and use a higher level thought process. Play is instrumental in language development, cognitive development, physical development, and social emotional development, all of which help children with their ability to be school ready. Here are some effective ways to incorporate play so that it resonates with your audience and encourages parents to support play-based activities in preparation for school. Depending on your theme for the week, a great way to encourage this is through dramatic play stations. For example, think about setting up a dramatic play area for after story time, like a flower shop, a bakery, or a cafe. This will encourage language development and social emotional development when the children are playing together in this area. Some other things to consider as play-based storytime activities are finger plays and flannel boards. These help to develop a child's cognition and general knowledge as well as motor skills and language development. Incorporating a parachute into storytime is also a great opportunity for children to take turns, follow directions, and work together. We also want to encourage play during unstructured time by bringing in new materials to create open-ended activities like toys, blocks, and crafts. Think about creating a block building challenge during storytime. You can have the room separate into groups to work on building the tallest or fanciest structure. They'll have to work together, take turns, and communicate with one another to build these structures. Keep it limited to 5 minutes and see if anyone volunteers to talk about their building when they're done. This all supports their language and social development skills. All of these play-based activities support school readiness. The authors of Supercharged Storytime state, writing is a key school readiness skill in itself. It should be included as a consistent element of storytimes. We can add writing in many facets of storytime. Writing encourages cognitive and general knowledge, physical well-being, and motor development, and language development. We can encourage school readiness skills through various writing activities. During unstructured playtime, you can put out coloring pages for children and adults to work on together. This helps encourage them to become familiar with writing utensils and will help develop their fine motor skills. Sorting activities can also help. I like to put out stations with blocks, pom-poms, or small toys for kids to sort into various bins. By adding tongs or tweezers to the activity, it can further build fine motor development. Also, think about adding a writing, cutting, or tracing station, all of which are great writing activities that support school readiness. During story time, we can also incorporate writing supportive activities through finger plays. Songs like The Itsy Bitsy Spider or Two Little Birds help with memorization and fine motor development. I also like to incorporate shapes and letters into story time to help support early math skills and letter recognition. These will help with pre-writing skills. Here's an example of how to add this into your story time. This week, we're learning the letter C. Let's look at how it's shaped. Can you draw a C with your finger in the air? C can stand for circle. Can you draw a circle in the air with your finger? This conversation creates a foundation for language development, motor skills, and early math skills. The last idea I want to share encourages name recognition. It's helpful if a child can recognize their own name before they go to kindergarten, and the library can help with that. Have children create name tags to leave at story time. That way, each week when they arrive, they're tasked with finding their name. Not only is it helping your storytime children recognize their name, it's also helping you learn it and create a better connection with your group. Reading to children is the first and greatest gift we can give our customers. Reading helps us satisfy several of the school readiness domains, including approaches to learning, cognition and general knowledge, and language development. The authors of Read With Me, Engaging Your Young Child in Active Reading, noted that kindergarten teachers gave higher marks in oral language to children who grew up listening to more stories between the ages of 1 and 3, compared to their classmates who heard fewer stories during the same time period. Fortunately for the library, we are poised to help with this endeavor because we're practically brimming with books that can entertain little minds. The most important part of this process that we need to focus on is the best way to help model positive reading behavior in the library so that parents and caregivers read at home with their children. Their support of reading at home will lead to the successful foundation we're trying to achieve. Here are some reading activities that help encourage school readiness. Book recommendation table. Have a table set up during story time that has books on it for checking out. Think about placing books on the table that refer to your theme. This will encourage reading behavior beyond the library. I also want to talk about active reading, sometimes referred to as dialogic reading. Active reading is when you have a conversation while reading a book. Active reading is one of the most impactful strategies to build children's early language and vocabulary skills that can be done at home. During story time, this can be demonstrated by thoroughly reading each page of the book. Discuss what they see on the page, talk about what the character might be feeling or thinking. Be sure to ask questions at the end of the book and do a mini recap to see what they remember. Remember, you're modeling the active reading behaviors for caregivers to replicate at home. Active reading will help to develop a child's comprehension skills, their social emotional development, and language development. Earlier in the webinar, I mentioned using a letter of the week for talking. The letter of the week can also help with reading activities. For example, today we're talking about the letter C and reading a book, Dog's Colorful Day. Do you hear the letter C when I say colorful? Do you see the letter C anywhere in the title? These active reading strategies will help establish letter recognition, sound recognition, and language development. The last thing I want to talk about is stopping to have the caregiver and child read during story time. Halfway through my story times, I like to stop and hand out books to the children, and they nestle in with their caregivers, and we read the book together. This is a great chance to help caregivers learn to read with their child, not just read to their child. This activity encourages social emotional development and language development. Storytime revolves around the process of reading, but through intentional incorporation of certain practices, Storytime can be a learning tool for parents and caregivers to encourage active reading at home, which helps to establish a strong foundation for school readiness. The last area I want to talk about is self-help skills. This is not part of the Every Child Ready to Read mantra, but it's a large component of being prepared for kindergarten. A lot of teachers want children to be self-sufficient. That means that teachers can entrust a child to wash their hands on their own or buckle their own shoes. Teachers are also interested in how well a child can listen and demonstrate self-control during class time. Self-help skills are found in every domain of school readiness because it really demonstrates how a child moves through their environment and participates in the learning experience. Some helpful areas to think about when incorporating these skills into Storytime include self-sufficiency activities. Think about adding activity stations focused on skills that involve buttons or snaps, or like I mentioned in the writing section, cutting, lacing, or tracing. We can also help improve self-regulation through activities during story time. Think about playing games that encourage taking turns or following directions, like the game Simon Says or Follow the Leader. Good listening skills are also important. It can help a child remain focused and supports mindfulness of others. I like to ask my storytime goers to turn their listening ears on when we start. I want them to recognize there's a time for talking together, and then there's also a time to be respectful of others talking. Remember to mention to parents how they can encourage self-help skills at home, like encouraging their child to get dressed by themselves or cleaning up their own toys. These examples build self-help skills that will support school readiness. It is important for public libraries to recognize the parent as the child's first and best teacher. Storytime is often hosted once a week in a library, meaning it's valuable time to make an impression on the caregivers present. This is where librarians need to provide better instructional support so that caregivers can encourage early literacy behaviors at home. Here are some helpful tips on how to do this. Make storytime fun. If the children are having fun, the parents will be having fun too. Make the skills approachable. We want caregivers to think, I can do this. Remember to mention the school readiness skills you're working on and easy tricks on how to implement them at home. You can also have a contest. Create a monthly challenge for caregivers to spend 20 minutes a day reading with their child, or come up with a list of school readiness activities they can do at home. Provide stickers and a calendar for tracking. Have a set goal in mind for the children to bring in for prizes weekly. This activity will help families remain motivated about reading and practicing school readiness behaviors. Your goal in all of this is to be a facilitator between caregivers and children, helping them to get the support they need to establish a solid foundation of early literacy and school readiness skills. Another important thing to think about when developing programming for your community is inclusion and equity. The authors of the webinar Supercharged Storytime recommend the following steps for providing equitable and inclusive programming. Identify local priorities, gather information, build relationships, plan services, deliver services, and evaluate services. In these steps, you can create a program specifically for the children in your area and the needs of their families. It will help connect your library with the schools in your community, build relationships with families, and establish the library as a vital service in an educational development role. While gathering information and building relationships, it's important to make note of the community members who are unable to make your story time. Here are some questions to ask yourself when developing your programming. Do your story times meet the needs of your community? Should you have an evening or a weekend story time? Could you develop a readiness program that could be virtual? Should you seek out alternative locations such as preschools, daycares, community centers, or gyms? Whatever you decide to do, it should involve the community you're serving. That way you know you're providing services that will positively impact their lives. The Views 2 program promotes that self-reflection is vital to positive storytime evolution. By reflecting on your storytime, you can create better programming by assessing your strengths and weaknesses and how the program serves your community. Here are some suggestions on how to self-reflect on your programs. Tape yourself. I know it might not be your favorite idea, but visually seeing how you engage with your audience might help show where you could improve, or also showcase what you're doing really well. Ask for feedback from a peer or a mentor. Having a different perspective from a fellow librarian can help provide beneficial information regarding the process. Or even ask for feedback from the attendees. They might be able to give you direct feedback on what they want to see during storytime or what they're already enjoying about your programming. You should also participate in regular written self-reflection. Here's some starting questions to think about. What was successful about my storytime? What areas could be improved? Did I incorporate the school readiness skills that I wanted? Did children and caregivers seem receptive, active, and engaged? What school readiness skills do I want to focus on next? Self-reflection will ultimately lead to better programming and help assess your needs as an early literacy specialist. The library offers a unique experience of being a place where young children are welcome, and Storytime serves as a third place for many families looking for books, programs, and enrichment. Thank you for watching my webinar today. I hope you were able to learn about how you can easily add school readiness skills into your preschool programming. Check out these titles if you're interested in more ideas about creating your own school readiness programs. If you have any questions, please feel free to email me. Thanks for watching. Here are the references. And here are the image references and licenses.